Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. We had a great time chatting with Shemi and Brad last week, so thank you again to them for joining us then. However, joining us this week, we're delighted to have the club's very own Alpine Safety Advisor, Bruce Goodlad. Bruce has been working with the club for 3 years now, but many of you may know Bruce in his more regular job as a professional mountain guide. Bruce is here with us to share some stories and fantastic pictures from one of his most recent trips, where he sailed from Ushuaia in Argentina to the Antarctic Peninsula, ending with a fantastic ski tour. Now, there will be some time at the end for Bruce to answer some of your questions. All you have to do is click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type in your questions, and then Bruce will have a look through them at the end of his talk. But on that note, I will hand over to Bruce. Thank you all again for logging on, and I hope you enjoy this week's talk. Over to you, Bruce.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, good. Hey, folks. I'm just going to go straight to share screen, because I think that's much more interesting for everyone, and show you some nice pictures. This is all pretty new for me, this type of thing, so I hope it works all right. It feels slightly odd giving a lecture sitting in my office looking out the window at some sort of rainy hillside, but hopefully it'll all work fine. As Owen just said, plenty of opportunity for Q&A at the end of the talk this evening. So rather than people kind of type in questions, please type anything you're interested in, except ski club politics, obviously, as we go, and I'll try and answer them at the end. You can answer anything ski related, but I think probably the most relevant, obviously, about this evening's chat. So a quick intro for me. I know quite a lot of you anyway from oh, hang on, there we go. I know quite a lot of you anyway from skiing or leaders meets or whatnot, but I'm Bruce Goodlad. I'm international mountain guide, member of the British Mountain Guides Association. I have my own small mountaineering business called the Mountain Adventure Company, also an avalanche education business called Avalanche Geeks, and the Alpine Safety Advisor for the ski club. And as Owen said, I've been in that role for 3 years now, which has been great. I'm also very lucky to have a quick word with my sponsor, Mama, who are a fantastic Swift clothing company, and Diana Starr, who are very keen to support me on the skis. So for most of you, ski season ended pretty abruptly, sort of mid-March. For some of you, even mid-holiday. And for myself, it ended pretty savagely by flying into Oslo Airport, checking into hotel to go to Lofoten the next morning. Flicked on the TV and discovered that actually the Norwegian border was about to shut and everyone was going to be quarantined within the next sort of 10 to 12 hours. So I phoned a Norwegian friend and he said, am I understanding this correctly? And he said, yes, get out. So within sort of 8 hours turnaround, I was back home, and that was the end of my ski season. But not quite. I thought I'd just sneak a couple of pictures in before we get to Antarctica of a wee adventure we had last week. Now, our lockdown here in France and in the Alps, close to Chamonix, sort of began to ease about 10 days ago. So myself, Mike, and I have been kind of looking at a bit of a climbing and skiing line, the Metre Ridge on the Dôme de Miage that we wanted to do for a while. So we managed to sort of get out and do that. We're not technically meant to bivvy or sleep in any huts. So we took our skis for a very long walk. We were, I think we carried our skis for 2,500 meters to the summit of the Dôme de Miage, and had what photographically was a really nice descent, but actually in reality was 600 meters of full you die skiing because the snow hadn't softened, followed by about 400 meters of nice spring snow, and then another 2 hours ski carried to the valley. So an adventure for the skis, but not really a classic ski tour. But anyway, so we managed to get an extra few turns in before the season finished. And the mountain behind is the Bjornsay. If any of you might have skied in Lake Contamine, you might recognise that. Anyway, on to this evening's talk. So what we're going to talk about this evening is a ski and sail trip made to Antarctica. This was back in 2016. I'm sure you all know where Antarctica is, and I've been pretty lucky to visit Antarctica on 3 occasions now. was first managed to go, was working for the British Antarctic Survey back in 1996, not that long after university. And then we flew to the Falkland Islands and then sailed from the Falklands down the Antarctic Peninsula to a place called Rothera. And I was based at Rothera for about 9 months. Well, it was a 9-month contract, so about in Antarctica, just slightly less than 9 months. And that was great. I mean, to me, it's still, I think, the best job I've ever had. It was kind of like one state-sponsored ski trip. And unfortunately, I was going to scan a few slides to give a bit of historical perspective on that trip and how the Antarctic Peninsula has changed in the last sort of 25 years. But unfortunately, I updated my software on my Mac, and it now won't speak to my scanner. So these are a couple of scans from a friend of mine. So, but that's me skiing on the Antarctic Peninsula, aged 25. So yeah, pretty close to 25 years ago. And you can see the kit was pretty basic. And lots of it. The great thing about working for BAS, the British Antarctic Survey, was lots of opportunity for adventure, and was thoroughly encouraged to go out and explore. And if any of you have ever seen a guy called Paul Rose on the TV, he's done some programs on the Lake District recently, and some various diving projects. Paul was our boss, and I've never had a better boss. You know, he'd just say yes if it sounded adventurous before actually thinking of any of the consequences about what he'd agreed to. So anyway, Paul, that was a great trip. It didn't end quite so well. I had a little skiing incident right at the end of that trip, literally about 2 days before going home. I had a non-releasing Solvetta 404 binding, if anyone remembers the Solvetta 404, which resulted in a spiral tib and fib fracture, which is all fine now. And if any of you have skied with Simon Abrahams, who's a bit of a regular on the Fresh Tracks programme, that's Simon on the right there, administering some first aid and then a shed load of morphine. But anyway, a bit of an adventure. Good pub story for sometime in the future. And my second trip to Antarctica was a little bit later. I then qualified as a mountain guide. This was in 2001, November 2001. I headed down south to work in the Vinson Massif. The Vinson Massif is the highest group of mountains in Antarctica, in the Ellsworth Mountains. Vinson itself is just over 5,000 meters high. And it's quite an adventurous place to get to. The only way to get there is to fly in. At that time, was to a place called Patriot Hills. They now fly into Union Glacier instead. It's got slightly better weather. In this aircraft, this is an Ilyushin 76. It's big Russian. It was initially designed for parachuting Russian troops out of, and the Russians use it for. It's designed for moving large amounts of cargo in really remote, difficult places. So it's pretty exciting, landing on a blue ice runway, as you can see, on wheels. And I was down there for 3 months guiding on Vinson. And over the course of that season, I was at the summit of Vinson 4 times with different groups of clients. And you can kind of see by the amount of clothing I had on, that was a sort of fairly cold weather trip. I don't think it kind of really got above -20 the whole time I was there. And then they actually offered to send me a 5th trip. And at that point, base camp had just gone into the shade for the first time in the season, which meant it dropped from -20 to -30, and I was on the radio saying, "I've had enough, get me out." So that was the first 2 trips, and they were both kind of fairly, obviously the first one was working for the British government, pretty big finance, and obviously, working for Adventure Network International, which is now called Antarctic Logistics and Exploration. On Vinson, again, it's a pretty big operation. When you start chartering big aircraft, and we had 4 aircraft that season, Twin Otters and Cessnas and DC-3s and all sorts. There's lots of money involved, and it's pretty regimented as to what you can and can't do within certain limits. But what I'd always really fancied doing was going and having a bit more of a sort of self-determined trip where we could, write our own adventure, choose our own objectives, do our own thing. So like most of these trips, to actually get the trip off the ground, it sort of started with a few drams, and this is actually a wee dram in Svalbard last year, but just because it's much more interesting photograph than a bottle of whiskey on my kitchen table. But I was sitting in my kitchen, and I think it was 2014 actually, with a very old university friend of mine, Andy Huntingdon. Andy and I started climbing together at Freshers Week in university. And we were sitting drinking whiskey, and we thought, well, we should really do a ski and sail trip to Antarctica. This is the best way to go and kind of be a bit more self-determining. But of course, life is not quite that simple, because it's obviously quite expensive to charter a yacht for a month and then sail to Antarctica. And then Andy's like, well, there's a little issue as well. I've just got to sail to Australia first with my family. And I said, well, when are you going? He said, when, 2 weeks' time. And how long do you think it'll take? Oh, about 18 months. So Andy, when he was 30, had bought a yacht in Australia and sailed it back to Scotland, across via the Philippines, Red Sea, that sort of route. And he'd always wanted to carry on back to Australia, so this was his plan. And his kids were now old enough that this was fine. So we said goodbye. We said, right, okay, we need to make a plan, because obviously you're about to vanish into the hinterland. So what we did was we texted my friend Neil Stevenson, another university friend, who lives in Norway now in Stavanger. He works in the oil industry now. But Neil had worked for the British Antarctic Survey, and he'd been and done 3 seasons on Vincent as well. So the text was a bit garbled, a bit drunken. It was along the lines of, Antarctic ski and sail 2016, are you coming? And very, very, Neil managed to sort of knows us well enough to interpret the rambling, and just sent back an email that said, yes, how much? So fast forward 2 years, Andy's now sailed all the way across the Pacific to Australia, and started working as a dentist in Tasmania. And we start to gather in Ushuaia. Now, Ushuaia is in the southern end of Tierra del Fuego, the island at the bottom, right at the bottom of South America. If you look at it, if you're looking for Cape Horn, Tierra del Fuego is the island that Cape Horn's on. And it's sort of a split between bits of it's owned by Argentina and bits owned by Chile. And it's not actually connected by road to the rest of Argentina. So it makes you feel you're pretty remote. It does feel like the land at the end of the world. A friend of mine, Tim Blakemore, who does regular work in Antarctica, describes it as Fort William without the charm, if you can imagine such a place. Actually, I thought it was actually quite an interesting place. It's quite nice, and it's its own charm. And the people who live there, because you're so disconnected from the rest of even Argentina, let alone the rest of the world, they have a certain way and outlook to life, which I thought was quite endearing. It's also the hopping off point for any kind of shipborne cruises to Antarctica, certainly to the Antarctic Peninsula. Not so much the Ross Sea, obviously, that's more from New Zealand, but for the average Antarctic tourist will start their trip in Ushuaia. It's the closest place to Antarctica. It's about 600 nautical miles anyway, across the Drake Passage. This was the first time I'd been to Argentina. When I'd gone to, in fact, first time I'd been to South America. No, it's not second, because we went through via Chile to go to Vincent. But first time to Argentina, which was kind of interesting, because I'd been to the Falklands when I worked for Bass, and that was kind of interesting to find out a little bit more of the history behind the war back in '82, and obviously seeing it from the viewpoint of the Falkland Islanders and chatting to them, and it was still pretty raw then back in 96 when I was there. So it's interesting to see, one of the signs at the port, which actually says, if you translate my terrible Spanish, what it actually says is, mooring prohibited for the English pirate vessels. So yeah, it's still fairly raw in their mind that this whole claim to the Malvinas or the Falkland Islands. And this was the Falkland Islands Memorial, which is the Malvinas Memorial, right down on near the harbour. And interesting, there's a fantastic photo display just on the wall, or in freestanding posters around the memorial, and photographs from the UK perspective, the British perspective, as well as the Argentinian perspective. And ironically, kind of chatting to quite a lot of people down there, those far closer links between the Falklands and the Argentinians than I ever realised, and certainly that we ever got fed by the UK press. Pretty much if you needed medical treatment from the Falklands, you didn't go to the UK. You went to Argentina. Everything that was all the support services coming in and out of the country was coming via Argentina. So it's kind of a real shame that they did what they did. But anyway, that's history. That's politicians for you. So anyway, so we all kind of start to meet up in Ushuaia, and it's always great to have a little ski tour, I think, before you set off on one of these trips, and just make sure that actually all your kit's arrived, all your kit's still serviceable, hasn't got broken, hasn't got damaged. Because once we get on the ship and set sail, we're pretty self-sufficient. We did have a spare set of skis, spare bindings, quite a lot of spare bits and bobs, but there's only so much you can really cobble together. So, and the Marshall Glacier behind Ushuaia is quite a nice place to go out for a little bit of a ski tour. And we got a little bit of fresh snow as well, just after we arrived. So we nice skin up to that col at the back. There's actually quite a big ski area quite close to Ushuaia, but it's shut for the season because it's now springtime in this part of the world. But we had some quite nice snow, as Louise enjoying some powder, which was always quite nice. And I'd never skied in South America before, so although it only counts as one day, I've only got Africa left to ski, and then I've skied in all the continents. But, there you go. But yeah, quite a nice ski down. Ushuaia in the background. You can see the port down there as well, where the boat was. So the team all arrived in Ushuaia. We kind of got all our kit organised, and headed down to the harbour there. And this is as I said, this is the hopping off point for pretty much all ships heading down to Antarctic, cruise ships heading down to Antarctica, but also where all the yachts kind of have their final kind of organisation and refuelling and buy food and all that kind of stuff before heading south. So the boat we'd chosen, and it's kind of this hopefully Daryl, whose boat isn't listening in. All the boats that operate in Antarctica are compromised in some shape or form. The Spirit Sydney is the boat we chose to go on. Daryl, who owns the boat, is Australian. And the boat had actually been designed for a single-handed BOC around the world race. So it wasn't designed as a yacht for expedition sailing. It was sort of converted to that in sort of slightly later life. What this meant was that it's a really fast boat for sailing, but not particularly comfortable to live on. Whereas some of the other boats down there may be more comfortable to live on, but they're not as fast or as good sailing yachts. So, as I said, everything's a bit of a compromise. And you want, if you're going to head into that part of the world, you want to go with a skipper who's been there a lot. Daryl had done at least 10 seasons. I can't remember how many times he crossed the Drake Passage. And, between booking the yacht, 2 years previously, we chatted a lot about objectives and ideas and concepts and what we'd like to get out of the trip and all that sort of stuff. So we felt we were very much on the same wavelength, because, any trip like this is a team event. So I don't think I've actually got any pictures of the team just before we set off, but there was myself and another mountain guide, Mark Charlton, who's now the president of the British Mountain Guides. There was Neil and Andy, who I'd mentioned. There was Mark, who's backs to us there. He's a regular client of mine. Louise, who I mentioned. And John Goodwin as well, who's there as well. So we're a pretty tight team, and we'd all skied. We hadn't all skied together as a group, but I'd skied with everybody, and most of the people had sort of met at some point or another. So you can see there's a few slight differences to a yacht like this before the normal yacht you might sail in, in the Med or on the Clyde or in the Bahamas or wherever else you might sail. These big rope reels at the back and on the foredeck to make it easy to tie the boat up to land. It's quite often you end up in places that are really deep water, and an anchoring is not a particularly great option, so you might use the rope reels to tie off. And one of those ropes at the back is nylon and the other one's polyurethane, because one floats and one will sink. And you can see the gas cylinders on the back there, because you've got to take everything with you. You've got to be self-sufficient for a month or away for. As I said before, the boat was designed for sailing and speed and not particularly comfort. This is the forward cabin. In the picture you can see there Mark and Andy on the left, the other Mark and Neil on the right. And ironically, Mark, who was at the bottom left, used to own his 80-foot yacht. So this was, he sucked it up big time for this particular, sleeping there for a month. But, he just got on with it. Inside the boat, in the galley, we actually took a surprisingly large amount of fresh fruit and veg with us. In the sort of bilges, where the bilges are pretty dry on the boat. So actually, we took a lot. Could put. We were still making guacamole from avocados on our way back after a month. We took all sorts of stuff with us. Lots of squash because it keeps really well. Lots of vacuum packed meat from Argentina. Anyone who's been to Argentina knows that the food there is absolutely incredible. The beef is amazing, so we took lots of beef with us. John was a vegetarian, perhaps didn't do quite so well, but hey, that's his fault. And even salad and fruit. So we did pretty well, actually. I think eating wise, it certainly didn't feel that we were on sort of some kind of regime. This is the main living area of the boat. We used to have our meals and live, and that was my kind of bunk on the left hand side there. It is pretty basic, as you can see. I had to kind of strap myself in most nights, otherwise I just fall out onto the floor. But hey, that's it. We'd signed up for an adventure, not a luxury cruise. And if any of you know yachts, you'll know there's a lot of rope on board a yacht. In fact, there's actually no rope on board a yacht. There's sheets and halyards, and there's only one rope. And if you don't know what that rope is, you can go and look it up afterwards. So anyway, so we set sail, and this is us leaving the Beagle Channel. And we were sort of, I was expecting, everybody was pretty psychologically prepared for a pretty rough, wild sort of sailing experience. The Drake Passage is sort of like the Everest of sailing, I suppose. It's the kind of some of the wildest water in the world. So we set off, and we actually had to motor. It was actually fairly disappointing, and initially we got what we expected later on, but initially we set off, and it was beautiful evening, heading down the Beagle and out into the Drake Passage. And I've stolen this. There's a few maps in here to get a sort of perspective on where we went and what we did, but they're all stolen from other people, and I haven't had a chance to draw any lines on them. So you can see the Beagle Channel there, Ushuaia, out of the Beagle, and then you can see heading pretty much due south for the South Shetland Islands, and that's a voyage of about 600 nautical miles, and we expect it to take somewhere between 3 and 5 days, really depending on the wind. The boat has an engine, so it can kind of push yourself along, but it's nowhere near as fast as sailing on a yacht like this. So actually, we really wanted the wind to pick up. And interestingly, having so little wind and motoring under diesel with a few diesel fumes pushing over the back of the boat, because we had a bit of a following wind initially, light wind, we had quite a few people getting seasick. I was pretty lucky. I grew up sailing. I started sailing with my parents when I was about 2 months old. So in a wicker basket. So I'm pretty immune to seasickness, but I think everybody else apart from Andy, who'd sailed around the world, was sick at one point or another. Anyway, these things are, it goes parts and parcel, I think, with sort of expedition sailing and adventuring in this part of the world. So after a day or so, we kind of got what we expected. The wind picked up, and we ended up with a kind of foresight on the nose for about a day and a half to bring us into the South Shetlands. So it's kind of what we expected. I think there's been an element of disappointment if we hadn't had a bit of wild weather. And as we went further and further south, we started to pick up some Antarctic birds. This is a black-browed albatross, so wandering albatross and various other things. And there's our Cape petrels as well. But I think that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of the sea. The sea's I find an incredibly difficult thing to photograph. To kind of try and get a sort of sense of the scale and the size of you don't really get big steep waves in the Southern Ocean, or we didn't. We just get massive rolling swells. So as we came into South Shetlands, another map to kind of get some perspective here. If you the top map there, we kind of heading in between Nelson and Greenwich Island, and then down on the bottom map, you can see Half Moon Island, and that was our kind of our first landfall, which was super nice. After kind of 4 days at sea, it was pretty wild, just to kind of get in, get anchored, everything stopped moving, open a bottle of wine, get ashore, feel like we've actually arrived a bit. And we had one night in Half Moon Island, and then moved down, if you can see the bottom left-hand side, down to Deception Island. But as you approach the peninsula, this was our first iceberg, and then this was a pretty exciting moment for everybody. It kind of makes you really feel like you're actually, it's serious, it's real. You know, when the skipper's saying, you know, make sure we're taking turns to have a look out with the binoculars, we're actually looking for things that can damage the boat. The boat's aluminium, and personally, I wouldn't choose to go down to the Antarctic Peninsula in anything but an aluminium or a steel yacht, just because, as you can see in the foreground there, lots of lumps of ice floating around, and it'd be pretty easy to hit something, especially in the dark. You know, when you're sailing, we sort, by the time we kind of got on the main peninsula a bit further south, it sort of only just got dark and no more. But certainly up in the Drake, it got dark at night. You know, twilighty dark, so it'd be quite easy to sail into something. So Half Moon Island, we pulled the dinghy out, pumped it up, and went ashore, and went for a little ski tour. And really, you know, obviously not much skiing going on there. You can see it's pretty flat, but just nice to stretch the legs and move around on the snow. You know, pretty much everywhere we went, as soon as you left the high water mark, you're on snow, and the easiest way to get around on snow is, as we all know, is by skis. And we were met by the locals. They're our first sort of contact with the local population. And for me, you know, I spent over a year of my life in Antarctica now, and to me, one of the most fantastic things about it is the penguin population. The penguins they're just amazing. Because the closest things I think we have in the northern hemisphere are puffins, but penguins are just so much more entertaining. Just they've got very poor eyesight on land. Their eyesight is sort of optimized for hunting, chasing fish underwater, so you can get really close to them, and they're really not that bothered about you at all. They can just you can just go enjoy what they do, enjoy their antics. So from Half Moon, we moved down to Deception Island, and I wanted to visit Deception Island for a long time. It's sort of a very important place in Antarctic sort of history, and from a whaling perspective, there was a big whaling station there, where the square riggers could sail right in through Neptune's Gap there. You can see the bottom right-hand side of the map, and it's an incredibly sheltered harbour given where you are. As you probably noticed, it looks a bit like the edge of a volcano because it's the edge of a volcano. So this is the rim of a volcano, and it's sort of semi-active actually, in that you can still find patches of really warm sand on the beach. And this was one of the first British Antarctic survey bases was set up here as part of Operation Tabarand in 1944. Operation Tabarand was a British military stroke. Well, it sort of grew into the British Antarctic Survey, and the idea behind it was to put some bases in Antarctica to keep the Germans out under the guise of weather stations. And Bass had a base there until '67, when there was actually a volcanic eruption, and they left in a bit of a hurry. And slightly different penguins here. We've got Gentoo penguins on the beach in Deception here, and you can see the black volcanic sand. And you can see bits of detritus all over the beach. And it's one of the sort of ironies of Antarctic history, and it's the same in the Arctic actually, in the high Arctic, places like Svalbard and Greenland, that if you leave your crap lying around long enough, it becomes a historic item and you don't have to remove it. So this is the remnants of a whaling station, where they take the blubber from the whales, they render that down to make whale oil. And this stuff's just abandoned all over the place. There's sort of sheets of asbestos, sheets of corrugated iron, rusting hulks, all sorts of stuff. And it's pretty interesting, you know. I personally find it really quite interesting. But at the same time, it's kind of all of a sudden there's not much responsibility for removing all the stuff that you've left behind. But so interestingly, British Antarctic Survey used to have a base called Faraday at the bottom end of the Lemaire Channel, and they decided they were finished with it from a scientific perspective, and they wanted to remove it, and it was going to be so expensive they managed to persuade the Ukrainians to take it on, and it's now known as Vernadsky, and so they didn't have to remove it. But whereas if you'd left it lying around long enough, it'd become a historic item and you could just have left it. But quite all over the place, remnants of the whaling, two Norwegian whalers buried pretty much on the beach there. Vertebrae from a whale, and these massive tanks where the whale blubber was stored before being loaded into ships and taken back north. And this stuff's just all on the beach, and you can see itself in the middle there. Some of the stuff, it was just built on a beach, and of course on a beach on a volcanic island, so it's all moved and is decaying and rotting in place. But this gave us our first opportunity to kind of do a little bit of skiing. We moved into the inside of the bay, into Telephone Bay, and we had some really nice opportunities for some just classic easy ski touring. This is Louise just out having a nice skin and some nice classic skiing. You can see in the bay there's a fantastic anchorage, and the boat that was in the bay there is a boat called Pelagic. I don't know if any of you remember Whitbread Around the World boat called Drum that was owned by Simon Le Bon, and it was skippered by a guy called Skip Novak. And Skip has two boats, Pelagic, this is the small boat, and Pelagic Australis, which is a much bigger expedition boat, 70-foot boat. And they'd actually come from the Falklands, so they had a leg of Falkland lamb with them. And the people on the boat, we got invited over for cocktails, as you do, because you're on a yacht. And they were doing research into penguins. There's a guy called Tom Hart, who's kind of the UK's leading expert into penguins. And Tom was heading over the next day to look at this chinstrap penguin colony on the other side of Deception Island, and invited us to come along, which was just fantastic. There's not very often you get to go anywhere in the world and kind of share that experience with really a kind of world expert on these animals. So chinstrap penguins, as I said, as opposed to the gentoos we'd seen on the other side. And as you can see, they're kind of into nesting season. And it's the penguin in the foreground sitting on a couple of eggs. And it's really fascinating watching them, because you just sit and watch these little folk for hours. And apparently the way you attract a mate as a male penguin is you build the best nest and the best sort of collection of stones, and then that attracts a nice girlie, a nice mate. So the only problem with that is that, as I said, penguins don't have particularly great eyesight, so your mate kind of sneaks up behind you and steals your stones, and they try to make a better nest. And you could just sit for hours watching these guys nicking each other's stones, hoping to attract a mate from each other, not realising that actually they've missed the boat already because most of the eggs have been laid. Now this side of the island's pretty rough. So whereas on the island side we were kind of anchored on, it's pretty nice beach. This side is pretty rough. So watching the penguins getting from this sort of nest building and stone stealing phase into the water to go to fish was pretty brutal. And for them, getting off, they dive in and swim, but actually getting on seems significantly more dangerous. Getting on through these rocks, through the surf. And actually the biggest danger of all was, it's not a particularly great picture, but it was a long way away, is a leopard seal. Now, leopard seal is kind of extremely predatory. They feed on pretty much anything. In fact, there's British Antarctic Survey lost a diver who was drowned by a leopard seal. And the leopard seals are pretty clever. They wouldn't attack any of the penguins who were swimming offshore. They'd wait until they'd been feeding and they were full of fish and they'd grab the penguins as they came back on shore, because they had much higher calorific value for the same amount of effort in catching one. So pretty brutal life to be a penguin on that side of the island. But after kind of a bit of penguin watching, a little bit of skiing, it was time to move from South Shetland Islands over to the main Antarctic Peninsula. on the map there you can see Deception, and we headed kind of past Trinity Island and then down onto the main peninsula to Cierva Cove. And this to me was a sort of transition from kind of, I suppose, the sub-Antarctic islands really to the main Antarctic Peninsula. And suddenly everything goes from kind of feeling, oh yeah, there's some snow and there's some rocks and there's some ice, to, oh wow, we're now absolutely surrounded by glacier, icebergs, a lot of ice in the sea, much colder, suddenly feeling really, like we're really in Antarctica. This is the real deal. And all of a sudden as well, having to think much more carefully about where we anchor to protect the boat from floating icebergs, because when you tie up at night, if you've just anchored anywhere there's a big, much tide moving around, you could easily get, or there's much wind, you could easily get an iceberg drifting into you in the night. So you want to be somewhere quite sheltered, and actually somewhere relatively shallow, because icebergs, I'm sure you all know, there's most of the iceberg, 2/3 of it's underwater. So it's going to run aground, hopefully long before, the big bergs will hopefully run aground long before they hit you. And to make sure you're kind of tied up and nicely sort of snug, we'd quite often put one of those ropes ashore, as Andy and I going ashore in the dinghy, just pushing through the ice there in the Zodiac to tie a line ashore to just keep the boat in the right orientation, to keep it out of the in some shallower water and keep us clear of ice at night, so we could get a good night's sleep. So this was our first ski tour on the Antarctic Peninsula. You can see all the bergs there, while we're trying to be quite concerned, and why we're pretty close inshore with the boat as well. And you can see in the photo there, we're actually roped up. So what tends to happen with glaciers is they accelerate towards the sea. So in the sort of first 300 meters off the beach, because they kind of accelerate because it's warmer next to the water, there's far more crevassing, much more chance of falling in a crevasse. So what we would do is right from the beach, we'd always skin going uphill with our skins on a rope. And that way we're just protecting ourselves, making life safe. And then we came to ski back down again. What we'd do is, because we'd kind of recognised the route and felt comfortable with it, we'd just ski pretty much back down the line of our skinning track, but without a rope, so we could enjoy the skiing. And we had a bit of flat light as well, which always makes spotting crevasses a bit more challenging. But our first little Antarctic summit, Neil here looking down onto the Sikorsky Glacier, and you can sort of get the sort of size and scale of the glaciers there. They're pretty darn big up on the peninsula, and you can see that acceleration there as the glacier accelerates into the sea. And the front edge of the glacier there is almost certainly floating as well, and that's part of why they often accelerate, is because they go from having friction with the land and being held back to a degree to suddenly they're floating, and that friction's reduced and it's warmer, and they suddenly start to move, and you get those ice falls or that crevassing close to the sea. So we got our first ski down, which is super nice, really nice, down onto the boat, onto the beach. Not particularly great light, but quite. And not particularly great snow either, but I think that's goes part and parcel with going to these sort of remote places, that you got to take what you get. Bad weather, variable snow, the whole works, but super nice skiing. Now it's quite interesting when we got down onto the beach and we're just getting ready to kind of the Zodiac to come in and pick us up. And Neil and I had spent a lot of time on the Antarctic Peninsula, and we'd seen a lot of icebergs rolling over before. So what happens with an iceberg is it's always trying to gain a state of equilibrium. It's always floating and trying to find its balance point. And so if a lump of ice falls off, the whole berg can kind of try and regain that equilibrium and can quite often roll over. So we're all on the beach, and Neil and I see this berg rolling over on the bay, which can cause a kind of like a mini tsunami. And Neil and I just turned around and went, "Run!" And everyone was like, "What?" And by this point, Neil and I are 100 yards up the beach, because we've seen how big these waves can be, and how wet you can get, or actually how much kit can get washed into the sea. So we're halfway up the beach before anybody else realises what's going on, but luckily it didn't quite get to us. So one of the super nice things about being on a yacht as opposed to camping is obviously you can bring a certain luxury of home, a few luxuries of home with us here. The gin and tonic, obviously being yacht based, it was pretty nice of an evening and quite luxurious. And if you scoop a lump of ice of glacier ice out of the water, You let it sit for about 20 minutes for the salt to melt off it, and then you can chip a bit of the ice off to put in your drink. And it fizzes when it goes into the gin and tonic, and the fizzing noise is all the air bubbles in the ice, which have been locked in there for thousands of years potentially, all just releasing. And quite often, if it's really quiet, the sea's really quiet, you can hear that fizzing in the sea, but it's pretty cool in your drink. Yeah, one of life's great gin and tonics. And of course, you can invite the locals round for a drink as well. One of the great things about having a Australian owned boat is that the Australians love a barbie. And as I mentioned earlier, we had loads of beef with us from Australia, from Argentina, which was just fantastic. I think, and it might have been because of where we were, but it was it's certainly some of the best beef I've ever eaten. Go skiing, sit on a yacht, gin and tonic, beef. It's pretty good. Anyway, as I mentioned before, we thought we'd been quite clever about where we parked the boat, where we anchored the boat. We thought it'd be shallow enough that we would be protected from the bigger bergs. Anyway, in the middle of the night, it turns out we were wrong. We had a bit of a bump in the night. So all hands on deck. And at this one, we managed to just sort of push past us, which was all right. But you can see what was coming ahead of it. And so Darryl hopped in the dinghy and managed to push. Was sort of pushing. You can't push these things. You can't change you can alter the direction. You can't push them that much or change the direction. It's just too much. But you can gently steer them a little bit. So while we pulled up the anchor and dragged in the stern line, he gently pushed bergs out of our way, and we cut and ran. If ever there was a time to change anchorages, this was the one. So from here, and we were heading a bit further south. Heading just sort of north, the arrow that comes up from Admiral Brown Base up to slightly further north of that. That's up to Nansen Island, and heading towards Enterprise Island. And we were kind of out at sea for a bit of sailing down that part of the world, and some of the bergs were just amazing. This is probably, to try and get some scale, it's like a 4 or 5 story tower block kind of size. Really impressive, massive things that were just sailing past, just absolutely huge, just super impressive, and just great to see. Great. I mean, you wouldn't see these things unless you're right down on the kind of main peninsula. And I think a lot of them break up before they get further north. So Enterprise Island was our next stopping off point. And Enterprise Island is a really famous harbour for yachts. This was a whaling factory ship that had caught fire and been beached here. It was owned, partly, I think it was Christian Salvesen owned it. And interestingly, it started leaking oil about 15, 20 years ago. And they still had responsibility for that. So they had to go down and pump all the oil out of it and sort that out, which was really nice to see. And so you arrive in some sort of reasonably mediocre weather and sort of stick Darryl on the boat. He's Australian, he's expendable. And he can tie the boat up to this floating hulk, and it's a pretty cool sort of spot. If you look in through the portholes in the ship, you can still see the head of the harpoons that were used for hunting the whale. It's pretty cool. And on the ship, there are these Arctic and Antarctic terns nesting. John, who was with us, is an ornithologist, very keen ornithologist, so he could tell the difference. Personally, I couldn't tell the difference, but the Antarctic terns generally stay in the southern hemisphere, whereas the Arctic terns have the longest migratory route of any bird. They actually migrate from the Arctic. They do the summer in the north and summer in the south, so Arctic to Antarctic every year. A really nice shot of them coming in with some food. And they gave us some really nice skiing. I think one of the great things about going places like this is you don't have to go large on the mountains. You don't have to go steep, because it's part of the experience is about where we're skiing and enjoying the view, enjoying what's around you, the snow, and the people you're with as well. So really nice, and looking across to the main peninsula from the island, and you can see sort of the lights a little bit flat, and I didn't have particularly great weather. But the thing about being in that part of the world is whenever the weather is good, you've got to really take advantage of it and make the most of it. So when we woke up the next day to kind of absolutely perfect, no wind, blue sky, and the mountains all around us just looking fantastic. Thought, right, if we're gonna get ashore and do like a mini expedition, drag some tents somewhere, and do some of the bigger peaks, then this is our opportunity. And we decided to sort of head across to Brabant Island. You can see it there, and try and ski a peak called Mount Parry, which is the highest mountain on Brabant Island. So I think actually the last ascent was by two other British guys. It was Jim Blythe and Jim Kerr, some of you may know, who's a regular on the Fresh Tracks, a few years before, and it's a really nice sort of ski peak. So that's where we thought we'd head. So coming out of Enterprise Island, out of the bay, still quite a lot of ice drifting around, and it's really interesting. This was, for me, one of the biggest learning points from the whole trip, was learning about how to work with a yacht and working in amongst the ice. And this ice, which looks really white, is actually quite soft. It's called first year ice. It's just ice from that year. And what you do is you kind of get a bit of first year ice on your bow like that, and effectively you just use it like a battering ram to kind of push all the other ice out of the way. Because what you don't want to be kind of getting involved with is ramming into glacier ice with your boat, because glacier ice is really hard and really old, whereas this stuff is relatively soft. And then when it disintegrates, you just go and find another bit to sort of stick on your bow, and off you'd go. So we got dropped off over on Brabant Island. And going from sort of slight change from normally skiing around with like just a nice day pack with obviously ropes and emergency kit, but we had to kind of upscale on the kit. So we've got tents and sleeping bags and food and all this kind of stuff. And the sort of classic way to move around in polar regions is to drag sledges behind you, but they're really difficult to pack on a yacht. So we went for this sort of haul bag system, which kind of works, but it's a bit of a compromise. To be honest, it's a bit rubbish, but it's quite hard work just dragging this stuff. But you can't really fit it all in a rucksack, because your rucksack would be too hard to kind of carry and certainly too difficult to ski with. So we went inland about 7k, getting it up into the higher mountains, so we could get to a place where we could actually ski on some of the higher peaks. And this is where we sort of chose to camp for the night. I think we've been going for 6 or 7 hours. So we decided this would do as our base camp. And it was such a beautiful and such a spectacular place that Andy decided we'd just annex it for Scotland. This was about the time of, the whole referendum vote was still very much in the debate, so it was quite appropriate, we felt. Now, one of the big shift is if you start on the boat, we had a water maker, reverse, but it uses a sort of reverse osmosis pump to create fresh water, whereas here we're melting snow. And if you ever go on an expedition, you spend most of your life on the expedition melting snow for water. And it's just like a hanging stove in the tent entrance there, which kind of allowed us to melt water, fresh water, and eating dehydrated food, which when I first went on expeds, 20, 30 years ago, expedition dehydrated food was absolutely awful, whereas actually now it's pretty good. That's me about to tuck into some Thai green curry with rice, which was actually pretty good. And getting ready in the morning, if you think it's a faff getting ready in a hut, you should try getting ready from a tent. It just it takes the whole thing to a whole new level. By the time you sort out your water, eat, pack, organise, it takes a while. I reckon it takes a good hour and a half to 2 hours just to get from waking up in the tent to actually getting on your skis. So anyway, we were heading out from Mount Parry. This was Mount Parry, and as you can see, it got kind of windy, and so we didn't bother going to the top. It was blowing like 50 knots plus, so we decided that wasn't really great. But the great thing about having kind of no really fixed objectives is you can just go and do it if you like. So this is skiing up a little summit just next to Mount Parry. This is Mark Charlton in the front there. Mark's pretty well anchored to the ground, whereas Mark behind is getting blown around quite a lot. And this wind-blown snow actually gave us some super nice skiing. You can see we got dropped off way down on the coast there. The tent is kind of, you can't see, it's just out of shot way in the distance on the left. And we had some really nice snow to enjoy in the descent. Super nice. Next day, we spotted a peak which we were pretty sure was unclimbed. There's a friend of mine, Damien Gildea, who's Australian, has written a book about it's kind of, I suppose it's like a guidebook to climbing and skiing in Antarctica. And I spoke to Damien when we got back, and he was pretty sure the peak that we climbed was hadn't been climbed before, and it was a beautiful, nice, narrow snow crest with fantastic views in every direction. Fortunately, all that wind the day before had completely knackered the snow, so the skiing was pretty terrible. But the view was great, and the wind had died, so it was a super nice day out. So it's back down to the tents, and then and packing up. And the thought of skiing with one of these bags behind me was so horrific. I just decided to adopt I'm just going to strap everything onto my rucksack and hope I can stand up approach. Whereas we had various approaches from other members of the team. Louise went for the fairly cautious side slipping on the steep and then skiing as fast as she could so she didn't get run over approach. Neil used the rugby approach where he'd ski as fast as he could with the thing dragging behind him on the shallow angle and then just pick it up and ski with it under his arm. All in all, it was all fairly unsatisfactory. So yeah, if I do any man hauling again with ski, I need to think about a better system. So anyway, we skied back down to the coast, and we're going to get picked up the next day. So we stopped about 100 meters just above the sea. And I mean, it's a beautiful campsite, obviously, but also I've read quite a few expedition reports of people camping right at the sea level waiting for pickup, and then a big wave coming in and washing half the kit and them into the sea. So just a nice safe place to camp and super beautiful. And Mark was really excited about building snow walls, so that's why we got a snow wall around our tent and nobody else did. So from there, the boat came in the next day, and we had quite, the sea ice is a massive influencer on where you can go and where you can't go on these trips. And all it takes is a bit of wind to kind of push the sea ice around, and you can either go or can't go, because there's only so much ice you can put your way through in a yacht. So we had some northerly winds which would push the ice off to the south, which allowed us to go further south to this place. This is Port Lockroy, which was the very first British base on the Antarctic Peninsula, again Operation Tabarin in 1944, and it was sort of abandoned in 62, and then actually in 1996. When I was there, when I was going south for my season working for Bass, we dropped a load of people off there on the way south to renovate the base, and it's now run as a living museum, and there's people there all through the summer months. In fact, if you've seen, there was a TV documentary about it. It's called something like the South Pole Post Office. And here, very different anchorage here. We kind of just snugged into some sea ice. And Mark and I carried the anchor out with an ice axe, chopped a hole in the ice, stuck the anchor in, and then we had two anchors and some ice screws all in the ice that really just pulled the boat in nice and tight, which was really nice because it made it super easy just to get off and walk around and all that sort of thing. And get over to visit the base, and it was really great for me to actually see all the work that had been done since '96. Because it was in a bit of a state when we were there. The roof was partly collapsed and all that sort of thing. But now it's been fully renovated, and there's 4 people there all summer, and it's run by the British Antarctic Heritage Trust. And over the course of the summer, they reckon they had about 18,000 visitors. So, and those were all on cruise ships. And that for me was the big difference on the peninsula from when I'd previously been there, was actually the number of cruise ships. We hadn't seen any when I'd been there in '96, and this was just, we saw a cruise ship maybe every 3rd or 4th day. It's very heavily regulated what they can and can't do. On a small yacht we can go anywhere and do anything, but depending on the number of passengers they've got, how many people they can land, where they can go, what they can do, so it is quite heavily controlled. So the inside of the base has done a great job of renovating it. They've got lots of original artifacts, and you can just go in and wander around. A bit like Scott's Hut down on the Ross Sea. This stuff's just been preserved by the cold and the weather there, the stove and the water boiler. And then the main living room that they had then. And they did a lot of upper atmospheric science there. That was sort of that was their kind of main scientific thing. And you can always find a Scotsman in a bar. So the nice thing about, as I said, about being tied up is we could just get ashore and wander around, go for a ski. And the peaks around, this is Winky Island in the background. You can just see it there with Andy skiing down. And then this was first climbed by a French team. A bunch of French guides went down there and did a route there, which is quite hard and quite adventurous. Another yacht is a German yacht we met in the bay. And you can just see where we're tied up, just behind Neil's head there, just nicely snugged into the ice. So it's great to be able to go off and go for a ski, and then ski down some nice steepish skiing, and then got picked up by the boat. On the other side of the peninsula there is Damoy Hut. Again, it's an old bass hut. If there's too much sea ice for them to get the ship down to Rothera, which is a bit further south, their main base, what they used to do is dump people here and then ferry them down by ski plane. But with new, bigger ships now and less ice, it doesn't seem to be a problem. And the ubiquitous penguins everywhere. As I said, the great thing with the penguins is they've got such terrible eyesight, they never really notice you're there, and they're really not bothered about you. With Anvers Island in the background there, some Gentoo penguins. The big, we didn't type of penguin I've always wanted to see is a king penguin and an emperor penguin, and the emperors are much further south, much colder, much colder weather, and there's no kings in this part of Antarctica. But hoping to go to South Georgia in a year in September time, and there's a lot of king penguins there, so we'll see. But, yeah. So from here, we wanted to see if we could come a little bit further south down that narrow fjord and between Winky Island and Port Lockroy. But unfortunately, the wind had changed direction. It had gone back around to the south, and it started to fill the bay with ice. And we were kind of trying to work out whether we could get further south or not. And Mark actually had a drone with him, so we flew the drone to see what we could see and see if there was any way through all this ice. And actually what it was this horrible kind of brash ice about as far as the eye could see, well, for miles in every direction. So we just turned round and started to head a bit further north into this place called Paradise Harbour, which is, you can, again, that kind of young ice there. And Paradise Harbour is called Paradise Harbour for a pretty obvious reason. It's absolutely stunning. And this, the next day, we had a long day sailing up there. And the next day, I think this is still my favourite ski tour of all time. It's certainly in the top certainly top three ski tours I've done anywhere. Partly view, snow, people, just the whole experience was just fantastic. And looking down onto the bay, there was a cruise ship actually just around the corner where we had a load of kayakers in the water, and Daryl thought he was going to get boarded. Lots of people asking if they could come on board and look around their boat, which you had to sort of fight them off with an oar, I think. And just a fantastic place to ski. You know, the views back down to Winky Island where we'd been before, just stunning in every direction. I'm not very keen on most pictures of myself, but I do actually quite like this one, just been in skiing board. And the ski down was just fantastic. You know, we had kind of cold feeling snow on the south aspects. It's obviously being reversed from the Alps. And then, what a backdrop to ski on. Absolutely superb. Just magic. And then on the northerly aspects, we actually got some spring snow as well. In fact, I like this picture so much, it's on the front cover of one of my books. But just super nice skiing. And a great backdrop. So from there, we moved a little bit further north up to Cooverville Island, and this was our last sort of ski of the trip, actually, our last ski tour. And just the yacht down there, and the landscape is amazing. Just interacting with crevasses and just the terrain on the scale all the time is just mind blowing, really. You get pretty good at skiing on a rope, and just some, how's that for a backdrop for your last day skiing? Just superb. So skiing all the way back down to the ocean, back to the boat, and then we moved out to the Melchior Islands, which is a really low kind of glaciated island. And this was our opportunity to stick Daryl up the mast and inspect the rigging, check all the running rigging, all the standing rigging, ready for our sail back north. And we've been our last barbecue. We might as well finish off the steak and the sausage before we head into the Drake. And actually, we made quite a lot of food that we could just heat up on the sailing. And we've been watching the weather really carefully to what we basically wanted to do was ride the coattails of a depression that was passing through the Drake. So to basically get sucked north on a really nice point of sail on a broad reach, which is the kind of fastest and most comfortable point of sail. And we expected it would take us, between 4 and 5 days to get back. So locals gave us a fond farewell, and we set off. And the track you can see on the right is our kind of track from coming south, and the red one is our sort of heading north. And it's a bit foreshortened in the photograph there, but you can kind of see the little triangles. That's a shallow point in the Drake Passage. You want to avoid that as much as possible, because any shallow water causes these big rolling swells to jack up into really big waves. And you can see where we come out of the Beagle Channel at the top there, and you can see sort of all the shallow water around Cape Horn, and that's why the Cape Horn is such an appalling seas, and it's really, really gnarly place, because the water suddenly becomes shallow and you get these really big waves. So so you can see that's why we kind of cut in there into the Beagle. So we headed out, and pretty nice, relaxed sailing, actually. Set off super early in the morning at first, and troops are all looking pretty happy. Neil's looking pretty cheerful. Neil had never actually been on a yacht before this trip, and then sort of things, they picked up, and the weather picked up and picked up and picked up. And we ended up sort of, if any of you sailors, we ended up broad reaching in 45 to 50 knots of wind for 3 days. At this point, Neil retired to his bunk and wasn't seen for the next 2.5 days. I think he went through all the phases of seasickness. When you start off thinking you're going to die and then wishing you would actually die. We had to keep checking he was alive. I don't think I've ever seen anyone quite so well. For Andy and myself, this was like proper, boys' own adventure. We were surfing a 60-foot yacht at 18 knots in the Southern Ocean. This was everything. This was that we'd kind of hoped for in our sailing experience. And you can see the sort of concentration on Andy's face helming in those sorts of conditions. So it's pretty exciting. And then turned the corner into the Beagle Channel, and the wind dropped, the sun came out, Neil stopped throwing up, and 5 hours of motoring up the channel later, we were in the bar after an incredible month. And we had such a fast sail back. It only took us 3 days. We took 2 days off what we thought. So I think it's still the boat's fastest crossing of the Drake. So so really was a fantastic trip. So probably went on a bit longer than I intended there, but I'm quite happy to take some questions. And I'm just going to hit we've only got one question. Someone's asking me about, can you say a bit about your skis, bindings, etc.? So thanks, Dave Clark, for that question. So I'm sponsored by Dynastar. So I ski on Dynastar Mythics, Mythic 97s, and they're the skis that I use for pretty much everything except for skiing in really deep powder, where I use something a bit bigger. I've got what's it called? Basically, it's a 106. It's a bit bigger, but it's quite a lot heavier. But that kind of Mythic 97 is, I think, about 97 to 100 is a really nice size of ski for absolutely everywhere. If you end up on quite hard snow, you don't feel too caught out. If you end on powder, it feels nice. It's got quite a nice rocker on the front, quite a wide tip, but it's stiff enough under the foot to hold an edge. And I just use kind of classic pin bindings. I use those skis. I can't remember what I had. I tend to use I've got a variety. We had on those bindings, I think I had plum bindings, but plum, Dynafit, Salomon, they all make just classic pin bindings, nothing specialist at all. And making sure you have ski crampons, and the skins I've got as well. I mean, to me, there's some really rubbish skins out there. There's all this stuff about modern fancy glue on the skins, with this sort of glueless skins. And personally, I've had nothing but problems with them, so I always use a classic kind of Pomoko skin with a classic glue. So Veronica's asked, how dangerous was the skiing? I would say not dangerous at all, personally. I never really felt in any real danger at all. If the weather's really bad, you don't go out, because if you can't see where you're going, you can't see crevasses, etc., and always skiing on a rope as well if we're in those sorts of conditions. So yeah, I decided it's pretty safe, really. Obviously, being pretty conservative, because if you do have an accident, you're a long way from help. Though interestingly, if you operate down there, everyone is operating the yachts and the ships are all part of the International Antarctic Tour Operators Association, so they have a self-help system where a cruise ship or another yacht would come and help you if you had a problem. Someone's asked what are the toughest moments. The toughest moments, to be honest, actually living in a really confined space with people you sort of know can be quite a challenge. And we had a couple of crew on the boat who I didn't really mention who were I would say that was the biggest challenge, was actually dealing with them. Darryl, the skipper, was great, but the two crew kind of weren't really, they weren't in their happiest place, shall we say. But I wouldn't have said there was any particularly tough moments, really just managing ourselves in such an extreme environment, staying warm, staying dry. And I think a big part of all those trips is actually making sure you've got good food, good sleeping bags, a few bottles of wine, and enjoying where you are. And not trying to rush, not trying to have too many big objectives, just enjoying the place. Jules has asked, how did you communicate with the yacht when our nights on tour? So we had, when it was ashore, we always carried a VHF radio, ship shore radio, just a classic marine VHF radio, and they also carried Iridium satellite phone. And I carry Iridium pretty much all the time when I'm skiing anywhere, even vaguely remote, even in the Alps. Guaranteed comms anywhere in the world, and the yacht had the same. So we'd just we'd have a agreed time to call, and then so that was kind of cool. So there it's pretty easy to communicate. Dan, ski bum, hating lockdown. I remember being an aspirant with Jim Blythe falling off a cliff in Peace Marina. I think, Dan, you'll actually remember it was Jim Blythe who fell off the cliff, not me. But yeah, I remember that trip well. And we had, Veronica was asking how many we had in the boat. So we had two guys, myself and Mark Charlton, and then other skiers. We had Neil, Mark, Andy, Louise and John, and then the skipper and two other crews. So it was 10 in total. And temperatures, Dave's just asked what temperatures like. It wasn't actually particularly cold. The peninsula is not actually that cold. You know, it was hovered, I think we probably had the warmest was like +5, maybe +8. And then we never really got below about -5. So it's a pretty civilized, really. Pretty civilized. Well, if nobody's got any other questions, I think I'll hand back to Owen.
Hi, Bruce. Sorry, we do have a few other questions. They've come up in the chat function. I'll read them to you now, and then we can cover them off. The first one was, what an amazing adventure. We're not sailors. How can we get the same authentic experience?
Well, most of our crew had no sailing experience before they went, so I would just sign up. And if you actually go sailing beforehand, it may put you off.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to, I would say a similar experience to going to Antarctica. If you want a kind of similar kind of polar type experience, but don't have a whole month to spend, and it's expensive. Obviously, going chartering a yacht for a month is pretty expensive. So I would maybe suggest going somewhere like Svalbard. You know, it's a lot closer. It's pretty similar. You've got polar bears instead of penguins, but you can kind of get a bit of a gist of it, and you don't have a week or a 10-day trip instead. So you can get that sort of authentic experience, but maybe not quite to commit to something quite so serious. Another question just popped up. Actually, Frida said, "Are you planning another trip?" Well, I'm actually planning to go to South Georgia in September 2021, and there is space available. And it's such a specialist thing, actually, going to somewhere like the Antarctic Peninsula on that sort of trip. I'd be pretty loath to just advertise it to anybody. I think if people wanted a trip, I'd very happily put a trip together for people, but you need a core of people who knew each other and had similar objectives and ideas about what they wanted out of the trip. Yeah, Owen, you have some more?
Well, the other question was, where should we start out if not going to Antarctic? But you may have just covered that off.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think, you know, I think the key to enjoying a lot of these trips is actually being a really solid ski tourer. You know, having really solid ski touring skills. but it's not the place to learn to kick turn and, you know, put skins on. You know, you want to have a really solid skill set so that actually all those skills are completely second nature. So actually you can just appreciate and enjoy where you are.
And there's a few more coming to the Q&As. Someone asking if you swam there.
No. No.
And I think the final one was, how do you dry your socks and boots, etc., on the boat?
All right. There's a diesel heater on the boat. Actually, there's a diesel heater that runs the whole time on the boat. So actually being in the boat is actually relatively comfy. So yeah, drying stuff off and having a water maker, we could actually, you could actually have a shower every few days. So you know, whenever you ran the engine, it heated it up. So yeah, it's pretty easy. So yeah. Someone's asked what was our number one aim. Our number one aim was to have a good time and come back safe. I think, which is so I can't remember who said it. Someone said, you know, when you go on a trip, the rules are come back friends, and come back have achieved something. So I think that's a really good rule. Yeah, Dave Clark said, have you read Tillman? And absolutely, yes. And do I see myself as a later day Tillman? No, because he died in a sailing accident. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think that seems to be all the questions. So I'll take that opportunity to just say a massive thank you to everyone that has logged on tonight to watch the talk. And we will have some other talks coming up in the coming weeks. So do stay tuned to the emails that are coming out on our social media channels to get details on those. We'll be communicating about those in the coming weeks. And finally, just want to say one last big thank you to Bruce for taking the time out of his evening to come and talk to us about his trip. So thank you again, Bruce. And on that note, I will hope to see you all soon. Have a good evening and do stay safe. Thank you very much.